So Mark, it's been 25 years since you wrote this book, Family-Based Youth Ministry, still in print, still selling well, it seems like. And,
How old were you in 1994?
I had just graduated from high school, actually. So I graduated in 93. Could have been one of the kids in your youth group at that time.
I'm sure you read Family-Based Youth
Oh,
Ministry
yeah. Well, that's what I was reading.
in high school. Right?
Absolutely. I was, this and God-bearing life. It's, what I was raised on. So, the funny thing is actually that's not too far off. I felt a call to youth ministry in high school, and so I'd actually sneak into my youth pastor's office and read Youth Worker Journal. Now that's not a good thing, because mostly what I do is I just criticized him for doing everything wrong.
Yeah. Because you knew the answers.
Well, I knew the answers. I'm like, why aren't you doing this like this guy named Mark DeVries says here in Youth Worker Journal?
Yeah.
So 25 years since this book was published, and for any book to be in print that long is remarkable. But in particular, you start this book with this chapter called Something's Wrong, and you subtitled it The Crisis in Traditional Youth Ministry. So I'm curious what you meant by that 25 years ago, and do we still have a crisis now?
Yeah. Well, the crisis many were pointing to was, just all the competition, the complexity of, two parents working, so kids are not at church as often, parents are not as committed to getting them there. The truth is those are problems, kids' busyness and all that. But the big crisis was that the data was clearly showing, and now, thanks to the folks at Fuller Youth Institute, that data has been replicated many times over, that kids were actually not moving to mature Christian adulthood. And that's the language used here in Family-Based. They were having these wonderful, almost inflating kind of experiences in their spiritual life. But what was happening is that they would, in the same way that they would abandon their cheerleader outfit or their Boy Scout uniform as soon as they got out of high school, they would abandon their faith at the same time. And that pattern has not really continued. Not really changed since that time.
Families have changed, though, I feel like, in a lot of ways in 25 years. So, have you seen the crisis change in that way, in terms of families and the way that they're involved in faith formation, because families have changed?
Yeah, what hasn't really changed is that families continue to have a profound effect on the faith formation of their children. One of the things that I still think is true is that that families, both the National Study of Youth and Religion, Fuller Youth Institute, they all point to nobody quite has the impact on a teenager's faith like their parents. The problem is we're not trying to create teenage faith. We're trying to create young people who live out their faith for a lifetime. Mm-hmm. And the number one predictor of lifelong faith maturity, and again, this is not terribly scientific, but as I aggregate the studies, it is much more about the extended family or the great cloud of witnesses, or all the other ways we might frame this. Sometimes we say traditional youth ministry. You've heard this before. Kind of depends on a Superman or Superwoman to run it, and family-based youth ministry is more about a Spider-Man approach. So we want to build this web of relationships rather than counting on these sort of dazzling programs to keep kids engaged. What we're realizing is traditional youth ministry we really have spent most of our time polishing up the things that are barely working, right? And so family-based youth ministry is an attempt to get underneath that and say, whatever program you do, there are a million kind of programs that can work, but if you don't have this foundation underneath it, which is this kind of family-based foundation, the long-term viability of young people's faith is really in jeopardy.
Yeah. When you wrote this, there were very few books or resources generally, I think, in the field focusing on the importance of parents and family and faith formation. Mm-hmm. Since that time, there have been a variety of others, but with different models that have been released. And So, one of the models I see out there now is, hey, let's just do away with traditional youth ministry. Let's go to a model in which, since we know parents are the primary disciplers, let's force it back onto them. Yeah. So if we get rid of these church programs and we put our resources into trying to resource parents, then maybe that is a better way to go about faith formation. What's your response to that?
Well, I call that home-based youth ministry rather than family-based. It really, and again, it's making the assumption that parents are the number one predictor of lifelong faith maturity. And I think they are very formative in lifelong faith maturity. But my reading is they don't trump the power of these other relationships. And so essentially, it is many churches, I think, are using that. And sometimes youth pastors are using that to sort of say, it's not my job, let the parents do it. And the problem with that is, well, many problems with that, but one is a lot of parents are not mature Christian adults themselves. The second is they simply are not going to do it just because we encourage them to do it. And so I want to suggest that the alchemy of faith formation is you want the youth pastor needs to own it. The youth program needs to own it. The parents need to own it. The pastor needs to own it. The church needs to own it. The kids need to own it. The idea is to expand the agency rather than saying, let's just put it on, it's just the youth pastor's job or just the family's job. That sort of unnatural polarization doesn't feel helpful.
It's interesting you made a distinction there between lifelong faith and faith formation during adolescence. And you made the statement about how the family may not be the biggest predictor of lifelong faith, which I think is saying something about what the nature and role of the church is in faith. I think you're making an ecclesiological kind of statement in some ways about what the church is and what its power is. And when, so I'd be curious, when you think about what the church is, do you think about it differently than those in a Baptist context? Because a lot of the models for home-based youth ministry have come out of a Baptist context, in which their model of church is it's a voluntary association of people who happen to believe in Jesus, and we get together on Sundays and we encourage each other a little bit. Do you have a different idea of what the church is about?
I think I do. Yeah, I don't want to minimize the power of what happens in the home, but sometimes what happens in the home, I don't know, I'm sure you're familiar with this book, Educated, which is about the woman who grew up in the mountains of Idaho, didn't have a birth certificate. But that mindset is sort of the extreme level of the only people you need in your life to shape your faith are the people in your immediate family. And we should be suspicious of anybody else out there. As opposed to saying, parents bring some wonderful things to the table, but as part of the reason therapists are so well accessed is because every parent messes up their kids in some way. You mess up your kids.
Oh, yeah,
I mess up my kids. And so the sort of balance to that is the church provides this broadening community. So instead of sort of the kazoo of the music of these are the values of our family, we have this symphony of all kind of instruments interplaying together. And, what we know is people that travel to other places are people that are the most anchored and clearest about who they are. They're the most creative because they see things outside of their context. But a lot of the home-based youth ministry has been this sort of isolationist, protectionist. We're going to keep our kids protected. And if we don't let them get exposed to things like evolution and the dangerous science out there, then they can keep their faith. And I think the data is showing that's just not proven out to be true.
Yeah. So what is the vision ultimately of family-based youth ministry? Paint the picture of what this looks like. I know what a traditional youth group looks like. Yeah. But what does a family-based youth ministry look like in your mind?
Yeah. Well, imagine just imagine a boat on the water. Okay.
It sounds good already. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, where they got a little boat on the water. Imagine dividing the boat into two parts. There's under the water line, there's above the water line. Family-based youth ministry happens at its best under the water line. So it's not a programmatic, there will be programmatic expressions, but you can have a sort of wild fog machine, praise band, skinny jeans, all that sort of stuff, with a family-based foundation that can actually have a more profound impact than a church that says, oh, we're a family ministry. So the programming up above the water, it can look very similar. So you can have Sunday school, you can have youth group, but what happens is when this foundation underneath is present, you're infusing the programs above the waterline with this deep connectivity with a group of adults, parents and non-parents, and just this beautiful constellation, this web of relationships.
Okay, well, give me a concrete example of what doing something beneath the water line would look like in order to enrich the programs above the water line.
So, yes, or it's Sunday. So today's Tuesday. Sunday, First Pres, where my son is the youth pastor down the street. They have this tradition of welcoming the new kids into the youth ministry with this event called Crud Day. Okay, so it's, as you'd expect, it's shaving cream and mud and, mud volleyball and all the things, right? And, there are probably in the neighborhood of 100 adults at that event. They're doing little jobs here, serving the pizza, doing registration, spraying kids off, cleaning up. If you were to ask the kids, how'd you feel about all those adults being at your event? They would likely say, what adults? So what happens is you create this developmental backdrop, an alternative version of the unit, because the narrative of the culture is kids are isolated from the world of adults. They're orphaned from the world. The narrative of Disney, the coming of age things, almost every one of them is an orphan. So the message is you can't really count on adults. They're just not there. And so creating an environment where it's not just about having a really cool program with a really cool youth leader and a bunch of young adults, but there are people of all ages out there. The pastors are getting muddy. There's all sort of beautiful symbols, but those people are not necessary to the program, but they have been infused in the program to create an alternative normal. Another thing, again, I'll point to Adam because I think he does this so well. Another thing is Adam has just started for the 7th graders, like a 5-week course on social media. So for new parents coming in and their kids together, let's talk about this. And so it's Sunday school. It's above the waterline. It's a program, but it's you're infusing that. You're not saying, okay, from now on, 7th graders and their parents will always meet together. But what we're saying is, let's insert some of these into the traditional programming. Let's exfamize those programs, build an extended family around those programs. So sometimes they are very deliberate standalone programs, like, you've heard me talk about the prayer partner program, where every kid's matched up with an adult who prays for them. That's kind of a standalone, or a parent workshop, right? Mm-hmm. But even ministries that claim not to be family-based, they got those things in their sort of pantheon of what they're trying to do, right?
Yeah, but it's different to do like an event like you talked about, like Crud Day. It'd be very easy for a youth pastor to be like, okay, I need 7 volunteers for this event, right? Because you're looking at it from the standpoint of what is it going to take to run this?
Right.
But you're talking about taking any event like that and saying, okay, we can run this, but how do we infuse adult presence and relationships into this event in a way that that feels natural to everybody. And so you're suddenly creating jobs and opportunities for relationships to happen. You're not making kids and adults sit down and go, all right, you're going to talk. You're providing these ongoing opportunities. So my question would be, 25 years in, and this is a hard question to ask, right? For somebody who wrote this book, but does it work? Does it actually work? Is this kind of ministry sustainable? What have you seen actually happen in the long haul?
Well, what we have discovered over these 25 years is that people buy into the concept.
Okay.
Conceptually, there are a lot of folks who are fans of, yeah, we need to engage parents. Yeah, we need to engage the whole extended family of the church. Conceptually, people love it. Programmatically, it's a real challenge, because doing what Adam does, nobody's going to push him to do that, right? If you don't have a great nursery at your church, and you're the children's director, you're in trouble. If you don't have a great youth group or a great Sunday school or great small groups or trips or whatever the thing is, you're immediately judged for that. If you don't have, but most churches view, not intentionally, but most churches view the engaging families, connecting kids to an extended family, they view that as like icing on the cake. That really is a sign that this is a premier ministry. This is top notch. This goes from 90 to 95. This is awesome. But it's not seen as, this is the first 50%. And if you don't have it, it doesn't matter what you have up here. The truth is, we're always disappointed when kids go off to college and then they find themselves feeling like their experience of faith was something they've grown out of. That's tremendously heartbreaking, and it sure still happens, and that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
As that Chesterton quote, Christianity has not been tried and found wanting; it has been left untried. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It has been untried, and there just have not been enough consistent models. Our friend Chris Sasser in Wilmington is doing some great stuff in family ministry, just trying to create a structure for how does this thing work. He's been one of the few that have sustained. He's been doing it 5 years now or so, and has begun to get some traction. The problem is, when Chris leaves and the church hires the next person, there's a good chance they're going to hire a youth person who says, yeah, the family thing's important, but we really got to get the small group program off the ground. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I am hopeful. I don't have the data to suggest it, though. I think Fuller's research certainly points to the fact that this alchemy of relationships does have a long-term impact. There's a book which I think I quote, so it's got to be 30 years or so. There was a guy who did a book called Faithful Parents, Faithful Kids. And his idea was, let's find out what's the technique that parents can use that can produce lifelong spirituality. And the author came with all these assumptions, like, okay, I bet it's family devotions. I'll bet it's going to Sunday school. I bet it's, had this prayers at bedtime. And so the way the research worked is they interviewed folks who were, by some indication, mature Christian adults themselves, right? And asked them, what did your parents do? And they were so disappointed because they couldn't find a pattern. They wasn't like, oh, my parents did it. No, it was a small percentage, less than 50%, except for one thing. It was over 90% of these folks that were interviewed said yes to this question. did your parents ensure that you had 5 or 6 other godly adults in your life as you were growing up?
It's huge.
That's huge. But most of the time, when we're thinking about youth ministry, we're not thinking about the boring people, these boring adults to bring in.
Yeah.
We're thinking about, let's get hip and cool and attractional. And long term, it just, that often doesn't produce, it has a way of producing a great youth ministry. But the goal of youth ministry is not youth ministry.
Yeah.
It is raising kids to mature Christian adulthood.
Mm. So in a lot of ways, the heart of family-based ministry, it sounds like for you, is a matter of kind of a vision, often that a youth pastor or a group of people have to have, that they kind of infuse into the traditional rubrics of ministry. And as soon as that person is gone, then that kind of, it goes with them. Back to Cred Day, for example. Anybody can do Cred Day, right? Cred Day is done all over the nation and under various forms and names. But youth pastors like, oh yeah, I can do that. But it's about having this vision that this is more than just a mud event. This is more than just a youth event. Right. There's something else going on. So how do we go? How do we go about implementing this kind of thing? And how does somebody who has that vision, wow, I can imagine that, yeah, it's important to have adults there. It's important to have parents and creating relationships and interacting. And how do I get from this vision to actually starting to try to implement something well in my location?
Yeah, so great. Well, the big thing is we have treated family-based youth ministry as if we're searching for the model, right? Mm-hmm. And typically what happens is somebody creates a nice one. They design something and it works for a little while. And then everybody thinks, oh, that's it. Family-based youth ministry is a little bit like student leadership. I sort of feel like student leadership has a 6-month shelf life. Mm-hmm. And when we talk to churches, say, how you doing on your student leadership? I say, there's 1 or 2 answers. Either it is, yeah, we just started something and I think it's really going to be great. We got 12 kids involved and they're the officers. And the other is, yeah, we tried that. It just didn't work. Right. But seldom do you, because the problem is we think that if we just put it in place, it will run on autopilot. Now, Sunday school will run on autopilot. Youth group will run on autopilot. Mission trips will run on autopilot because that's a well-worn path. But this is more like a laboratory and less like this well-worn path. So to do family ministry well, family-based youth ministry or family-based children's ministry well, it requires this constant process of reinventing, experimenting, exploring. Part of the problem with experts, and you and I claim that role. Part of the problems with experts is that we lose our exploratory edge, and we think we have the answer because we did family-based youth ministry for 6 months. Well, that's about as long as it's going to last. We got to re-up it every year, and some things are going to stick. Like for Adam, they've been doing Cred Day for 15 years. So Prayer Partner Banquet, they've been doing it for 10 years. Some things stick, but by and large, we've got to relook at the calendar every year, go to the laboratory and say, if we really believe that this is the thing that's going to have the deepest impact on kids' long-term faith maturity, what are we going to try? And so then it gets to design thinking, which is right at the heart of where you guys have been recently.
Yeah.
And so we empathize. What do families really need? Do they need another class to keep their family busy, or do they need something else, right? We empathize, we design, we test, we prototype, right? We work that design process. But I think one of the reasons family ministry and youth ministry or family-based youth ministry has not taken hold programmatically is because we brought to it the mindset that I can design a completed project and then I'm done. And I'm just going to let it work. Apple doesn't do that with their iPhones. Google doesn't do that with their stuff. We've got to, and I think family ministry invites us into this, more sort of creative, innovative, entrepreneurial sort of space.
Yeah, what's interesting as you say that is that I remember distinctly when I first read this book, which was probably 98, 99, so just a few years after it was out. I remember distinctly going, okay, I get what he's talking about. Now, where's the stuff? Like, where's the program I'm going to put in place? And I remember getting back to here it is, the vision of family-based youth ministry. And I read it and I went, okay, yeah, but where's the stuff? Yeah. And I got to the end and I went, wait a second, like, he didn't give me any stuff. And the stuff he gave me was, I guess, not going to work where I'm at. So I kind of tossed it aside. But this is more about seeing a vision that's implemented in a particular location for that time, rather than seeing a program that is implemented that lasts for 20 years. Right. And I think we've seen that we've made an idol out of longevity and repeatability in youth ministry, rather than did this thing that we did in this time in this place accomplish our goal. Yeah. What's interesting is that you read scripture and God never does the same thing twice, and yet we end up with people that follow Christ who love to do the same thing the same way. Where that comes from?
Sometimes more than twice.
Yeah, more than twice. We're just getting going if we've done it twice. Yeah. As you think about the difficulties that today's youth workers have with ministering to the kids of this generation, isolation is one of the big things that people talk about. Kids isolated from adults for a variety of reasons, social media being one of them. Do you see that is something that's changed, that kids are more isolated? Do you see less isolation? Or do you see that maybe is not even the right way to frame the problem?
No, I still think isolation is, part of the reason kids are not making it to mature Christian adulthood is because they're growing up in an adolescent ghetto. And the youth ministry is part of that adolescent ghetto. And if to make the leap into adulthood, they've got to be in the world of adults. And often when they make that leap to a job at a bank or someplace else, right, they often jettison their faith in the process, because their faith doesn't fit in the world of adulthood. Going to camp and singing around the fire doesn't, as profound and meaningful as that was, it's not in the plausibility structure of the well-worn path of adulthood. And so if we want them to carry their faith with them, we've got to immerse them in this world of adulthood much earlier in the process, rather than we brought kids, we created youth ministry, I believe, because kids just sitting with their parents wasn't working, right? Mm-hmm. And so the whole idea was, let's get them out here, pull them into the flow of the whole life of the church. Well, somewhere along the line, we forgot that, pulled them into the flow, and it just became this isolated piece out here, really outside the flow of God's original design, I think, for how our faith is formed.
Mm. When you talk about family in this, do you mean the nuclear family?
Yes, and. Okay. So I would sort of provisionalize the nuclear family. And I don't want to minimize the incredible power the nuclear family has, but I don't know if this is true for you. When I do this, straw poll in a seminar, I'll say, okay, how many of you had one person in your life who had more influence on your faith than your parents did? At least one person. 75% of the hands go up. Mm. That doesn't mean their parents' influence wasn't significant, but it wasn't ultimate.
Yeah.
And so that's why I feel like, there is a bit of, especially in some sectors of the church, there's a bit of idolatry of the nuclear family, and particularly where there's some rigid prescriptions about this is what, a Christian family is supposed to be, the biblical family. Sure. The truth is, the biblical family,
it's a mess.
Have your grandmother move in with you. That's closer to have your cousins live next door, all sleep in the same room. That's the biblical family, mm-hmm. right? Not this sort of American notion of leave it to Beaver. That is far from biblical. I mean, you've heard me talk about Jesus and come at 12 years old, right? Mm-hmm. And his parents totally ignore the kid on a 12-hour travel day. They have no idea where he is. The only way that makes sense is Mary and Joseph are absolute irresponsible parents, or we're living in a really different world. Mm-hmm. And I want to vote for the second one.
Yeah. Where you have extended family that's traveling together, and
Uncle Abinadab has him. Cousin Jesse's got him.
Yeah.
Aunt Miriam, he's with somebody. We're not even worried about it. I mean, that is so almost unimaginable for modern sensibilities.
Which says something, I think, about the nature of family-based youth ministry for the myriad of family types that we find today. Single mom and kids, or single dad and kids. And one of the pushbacks in other forms of family ministry or parent ministry is, what do you do with the kid who doesn't have a Christian mom or dad? Or what do you do with the kid who has a Christian mom maybe, but she's, working 80 hours a week? And this model doesn't exclude those kids, I don't think, right?
Right. No, I mean, in fact, it has a special place for those kids, because those kids, like all the kids, belong to the whole community of faith. And the youth pastor's job is to intentionally build that constellation of relationships for every kid. So, I mean, I grew up with a single mom, and man, my pastor, my uncle, the whole gravy train of youth pastors that left every 6 months, just random people in the church that knew my name, my young life leader, all of that was a part of the alchemy. But I think it happened beautifully in our little church in Waco, Texas, because we weren't organized enough to have a zippy youth group. And so this random parade of volunteers had to keep trying stuff. And it hardly ever worked, but it didn't have to work, because in the process, these people became significant sort of guarantors of, this is, you belong, you got a place, right?
Yeah. Last question for you. 25 years in, I'm sure there's something you've learned about this that's not in the book. So what do you want people to know that didn't make it into family-based, but 25 years on, you're like, oh, I really wish people would know this?
Yeah, I think the big thing, I've sort of hinted at it, but just don't expect it to work. But it doesn't have to work for it to work.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to look like a win for it to be a long-term win.
It doesn't have to look like a program win, right?
It doesn't have to look like a great zippy program. And we had these lousy retreats when I was a kid at my little church. 10 of us would go on. Program was pretty shoddy and miserable. But those were really profound times for me, and times where I felt like I was under the shelter of this community of faith that really loved me and called me and valued me. And totally imperfectly. But I think the high level focus on, let me create a great program that we can point to and say, there's family ministry. I think that's one of the places we're going to get really stuck.
Yeah. It reminds me of what Ken Dean talks about in terms of our job is to build a scaffolding of faith that ultimately the Holy Spirit will fill. And so our job is to create a scaffolding in which young people come together with old people in the church and parents. But that doesn't mean that we're the ones that bring those relationships to life. We're just there to see if they can, if they can fly. And it's ultimately the Holy Spirit that guides and informs those. So thank you for your time. Appreciate it. And
glad to be here at the international headquarters
right here
of the Center for Youth Ministry Training, a place near and dear to my heart.
Well, I can't wait to get back together with you for the 50th anniversary of this book.
Yeah, that'll be
talk more.
That'd be great. I'll roll right into your office.